So IDM Research Lab, the future of equity. So just to preface this with like, I was putting this together and I was like, oh, I kind of like this like type design I'm putting together. However, this is by no means a logo, right? This is all process, and this is just like, oh, I'm putting together a presentation. I wonder how it would look with the and of and da 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 da. So we're really starting at the beginning of things. So just a basic question to start us off, right? So the future of equity, right? So what is the future of equity? And so from this question, hopefully we'll come up with all kinds of very interesting theses. But I like to start with the who, what, where, now, when, how. Yeah, who, what, where, when, how, now. Yeah, something like that. So I expanded. So where is it? Who does it involve? What does it look like? Feel like, smell like, sound like, taste like? Sounds weird, but could be something we think about. And when does it happen and how? So our working description, that we wrote last year as a group. So, and this has been slightly edited since we've gone mostly virtual. This was when we were imagining maybe an online place for this project. I mean, an in-person place for this project. So the future of equity explores the aberrations that appear when hidden narratives are manifest from the data captured in our day-to-day world. As a transmedia experience of video projections and spatial sound, the future of equity brings digital intelligence onto the set of our shared physical and digital spaces. In this augmented reality setting, we present a visual experience that illuminates the hidden narratives of public information in a digital and possibly physical environment with cutting-edge art and technology. So, like I said, this is a working document. I just wanted everybody to get a sense of exactly where we started from. The keywords here, I think, are AR, play, emerging media, web, creative coding. As far as technology goes, also, equity and futures and near futures. Okay. So just really basic. When I'm starting a project or when I'm thinking about tackling my own project or a client project, I'm going to try and create some kind of structure and criteria for myself. And so think of this as a really loose structure. So like a guideline. So part of creating this project is learning what the structure is, what our criteria is, and when to change it, and realizing when it's time. So tasks. So tasks for this project are really just basic design research tasks to start us off. So we're researching, developing, prototyping, playing, user testing, perhaps iterating and repeating. And so, it's possible we might only get through 1, 2, and 3, or we could go all the way to 7. I mean, it really depends. It could take 3 years to get to step 7. It could take 3 months to get to step 7 once, and maybe 2 years to get to step 7 again. That's sort of up in the air. So some tools to think about. So web applications, Unity, motion captures via Kinect and software, HTML linked websites, as well as I wrote Unity twice, Unity in combination. Techniques such as web scraping, video, audio, digital graphics, writing, HTML, CSS, Python, etc. I would add like animations. And then goals. So research and create theses, critical making prototype, interaction with and engagement with technologies. Okay. Typo. I'll update these typos before I finalize it and put it in the drive. Okay. So an example of some current subject or issues in digital media. So there's what's called the digital divide, which is an idea, a theory that has been around for quite a long time, and it essentially overarches like all kinds of discrepancies and biases in the digital world, such as who has access to it by gender, by race, by socioeconomic status, by age, as well as like what parts of the world geographically have access to what kinds of internet and where things are distributed. The internet unfortunately is not created equally for everybody. So I wrote access next to that. So artificial intelligence is a huge current subject and issue in digital media. What is the future of that? What is its role in our life currently? And what has its role been for decades, really? And then, of course, misinformation, which I think it's just crucial to talk about while we're creating any projects in digital media at this current moment in time. So here's an example. So this is from USA.gov. So the percentage of students with either no internet access or only dial-up access at home was highest for American Indian and Alaska Native students. So here's an example for the percentages of all the people categorized into their race category who don't have access or only have dial-up access, which is much, much slower than the kind of internets we're using currently. So you can see that people who are white and people who are Asian have more access than any other group. So some approaches we can take to this project. So research, speculative design, critical design, narrative fiction, and human-centered design. And of course, these aren't categories that sort of have hard boundaries. These are categories that move in between each other and have similarities, and they cross over, but they're useful titles to sort of organize the difference between critical design, looking at subject matter and trying to distinguish what are the effects on people, the earth, what are the systems doing to our existing lives, and their speculative design could look at that, but project into the future, 20, 200 years. So this is a fun graph from IDEO. I think that you've talked about design thinking a little bit from what I've been told. So, but I wanted to show this just as a starting point to when we're looking at speculative design. So of course, design thinking from IDEO has been branded in all three of these categories. So there's this intersection, this like hot spot in the middle between people, business, technology. And then they have these extra writings here: experience and innovation, process innovation, functional innovation, emotional innovation, brands, marketing, relationships. So I think what they're presenting here are constraints. So people are a constraint, business is a constraint, and technology is a constraint. So business is the viability, but what they mean is like, what is the profit and what can they afford to do, right? And how can they profit off that? People, it's desirability. It's also what they are have access to, as well as what they are capable of using. So if you give people very, very complicated technologies, as we know, we have to be trained on them. And so what the iPhones and other systems have accomplished is they slowly train people on how to use their, swipes and scrolls and clicks. And so they have slowly trained people to be able to use this technology, but they can't jump ahead and say, well, now we're using this whole other system that has nothing to do with swipes and scrolls, and actually you have to, turn your head to the side 4 times to get to the next screen. That wouldn't, people wouldn't know how to do that. So even though it can be done. So, and then technology, of course, what has been invented and utilized, and how can that cross over with these different sections. Okay, then right from that article on speculative design, I wanted to bring in this graphic. I thought it was really interesting to think about, today. So this would be us right now discussing the future of equity, right? And so we can imagine projecting into time, and we can put any number we want over this line, right? We could say 1 year, 5 years, or I guess 100 years. But I really thought this circle was important because it's telling you, it's not just saying, likely or science fiction, like pretend, or and it's not binary in that way. It's saying, something that's probable, something that's possible, something that's plausible, something that's preferable, which, right, infers an opinion or a preference from maybe a specific group, or maybe it's preferable because that would be what benefits all of humanity, which would be a really tall order, right? You could also say here maybe, likely and perhaps, potential future, like, in a negative way. So I think we could just constantly, add different words onto these dots here and think about the different scenarios through different viewpoints. So I'm going back to this design thinking. So then in this speculative design graph, or there is the, or diagram rather, there's the traditional design, right? And so I believe that this belongs here in this traditional design practice where you're thinking about what is now. This is sort of a picture of the present. And then there is the discursive design practice. And I'm going to talk about discursive right after the slide because I think it's an important point, which means like what could happen essentially, like what if we did things differently. And then a critical design practice where, you know, they're intersecting there. So we're changing the way things have been traditionally done with perhaps a critical lens. And then there's this cone shape, right, that you could say is a speculative design practice where these ideas are funneled into. So discursive design, it invites us to see objects in a new light, to understand more than their basic form and utility, beyond the different foci of critical design, speculative design, design fiction, interrogative design, and adversarial design. We are invited to establish a more comprehensive, unifying vision, as well as innovative methods. So how can we explore objects? How can we explore objects? I'll fix that. For example, how can objects be used by counselors and therapy sessions, town councils to facilitate a pre-vote discussion, by activists seeking engagement, and by institutions and industries to better understand the values, beliefs, and attitudes of those whom they serve. So I would say that also has to do with not just objects, but systems. So this is from the Discursive Design book, MIT. The link for the reference is here. And the authors who wrote that, you know, we're really looking about objects and how the objects can have impact in different spaces. But discursive design can also think about systems that are in place and how those systems can behave differently in specific scenarios, right? Such as voting would be one, education, the way we distribute like government funds, right? So discursive design sparks new ways of thinking, and it is only through new thinking that our sociocultural futures could change. So this is a really big claim, right? Discursive design sparks new ways of thinking, and it's true that design, while it intersects with other disciplines, can create really different outcomes and change, but it's important to think about how that change is affecting people, and you know, if that change is going to be positive force or not. Okay, so Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby are the inventors of this, or one of the modernizers of this idea of speculative design, and they created a program at the Royal College of Art. And now actually, recently they were at Parsons. I believe that's where they still are. So this is from Parsons. I wanted to show this. I'm just gonna make sure my audio is shared. Okay.
I'm Fiona Raby.
Hello, I'm Tony Dunn. My background's in industrial design and Fiona's in architecture. And when we graduated, we immediately went into work in industry, in my case, and in Fiona's case, in various architecture studios. It wasn't long before we started to feel the more traditional roles for what we did were quite limiting. And over the course of a few years, we gradually realized that we should probably set up a studio and try and explore the sort of design that we think we should be doing. So inspired by a lot of radical Italian design from the 60s and 70s and very experimental architecture, mainly from Japan, we set up Dunn & Raby in the early 90s and tried to embark on the direction, I guess, that we're still going in now.
We were heavily influenced by living in Japan. It was a real eye-opener for us to be in such a country that loved technology and assimilated it in their everyday lives, and it's something we found incredibly inspiring.
it's like a counter design. There's the official design we get from industry, and then you can offer an alternative form of design that has a different way of seeing the world and set up some kind of tension and conversation. But really, we'd love to see just multiple versions and many, many different futures for technology, for the stories that are framing technology and so on.
And the languages that are used. So a lot of the experiments we do is we never try and use the same languages that people use. So our robot project is exactly about that. You know, the first thing that people say is they're sort of disappointed. That's not a robot, they say. You know, if they do that, then that's the project in many ways. The very fact that what they think a robot is and should be is still, we think there's still a broad range of things that it could possibly be. It's not. We don't see that as a closed thing. We think that there's still lots of robots out there that haven't even began to be imagined. The human genome in 2005 around that was being kind of unravelled, and we were reading constantly about all these genetic technologies that were going on, and we just felt that, you know, is this an area that designers could be involved with? It worked with young 24, 25-year-old women who are just at the point where they're thinking about their fertility, and we created these things called evidence dolls.
I find it quite difficult messing with nature. But if you could sample the best of this one and that one and put them together, is it tempting fate? It's incredibly selfish to want the best and not be happy with what nature gives you. But if you can do that, why not?
The crucial part of our work is saying we're all exposed to almost like a monolithic version of the future that's coming mainly from industry, when we talk about technologies. And yes, we want to challenge that and say, well, there are many possible futures. And not in the sense that we want to argue for one of those futures and try and persuade people to pursue it, but to simply reveal the space of possibilities and hopefully facilitate or encourage other people to join into that space. So we're even, at the moment, trying to untangle ourselves from futures where there is this sort of linear projection from the present into the future, and trying to almost even reverse engineer a conceptual design back to the seeds in the present society, whereas we're trying to think of other ways of framing the work that sidestep that set of issues, and looking more at literature and cinema and even fine art, where there are different ways of managing alternatives, rather than the design strategy is always to situate them in the future, an imaginary future.
So it's not an end point, but a counterpoint. That's the kind of space we want to be in.
Okay, so, you know, their work is very conceptual, and I believe that it takes on an almost objective point, or almost like transcendental, like void of socio-political influences. So I think it's useful to look at this and as a starting point, as, you know, our predecessors, as somebody people who have done this for a long time, but also think about where they're coming from, their backgrounds in industrial and architecture, and that they're both from, you know, London. So just taking in the whole picture. The next thing I'm going to show, I have 2 more videos to show. So these are shorter. These are about 50 seconds. And in both these videos, they're by this group called Metahaven. They're also a European group, and they are in Amsterdam. And so I have a few links here, so I just want to explain it. So this is their website. They have this sprawl space where they keep most of their video works. And then there's this east-east.world, which as I was researching, I found that they have this really beautiful video out right now about somebody in Kiev, Ukraine, and another, a young woman in Kiev, Ukraine, and a young woman in Beirut, Lebanon, before the bombings happened, who they recorded and were really thinking about what place means, and it's called Home Home. And so they're thinking about technology and place and stories. And so that is actually available to watch only until the end of today. So I do recommend you watch that. It's 30 minutes long. So here I'm gonna show you a video they did in 2016. And so in this video, I'm gonna introduce this scholar, Benjamin Bratton, and I'm gonna introduce him again in the next video. Benjamin Bratton is a scholar at UCSD, so University of California, San Diego. And bear with me because this is just a little bit dystopian and really, really theoretical. So I think that it can be off-putting, but if you listen for, in this video and the next, some of the sort of cues about culture and society. So their focus is on futurism of technology, but really, really embedded in culture and society. So this is maybe the other end of this like Western spectrum of future design. So I want to show you that.
The development of planetary scale computation, this accidental megastructure that I call the stack, has both deformed and distorted this traditional Westphalian model. And so the stack is understood as both an actual massively distributed technological infrastructure in which and on which and with which we organize our cultures, economies, and societies, but also as a kind of abstract model for how it is that we could conceptualize subdivisions of political geography that are not about just horizontal adjacencies, but actually about vertical layers, where one site and one person and one event, one network may be claimed, may be part of the jurisdiction of multiple forms of political sovereignty at the same time, one on top of another.
Okay, let me go to the next video before I explain that a little.
At the level of the interface, though, I think longer term, this is where the capacity for a kind of a real splintering in the way in which we perceive reality at a political level is possible. You know, if you think of something like augmented reality, right? Google Glass or Microsoft HoloLens or Facebook's Rift, something like this. What you have in a way is a kind of an immediate lamination of a narration of the real that is brought directly into how it is we perceive that reality. So it's not just I see a person across the room, but I see their name, their information about them. Any interfacial regime, whether that's Google or Microsoft or anything else, is a way in which this enormously complex system of the vast, global supercomputational network is made simple enough, is narrated enough that people can make use of it. In the course of doing so, this incredible reduction takes place. And in that reduction of all the possibilities into just a set of buttons with words on them that you can click, there is inevitably a highly ideological distortion of all of those possibilities into a framework.
Okay, so if I can try to summarize that a little bit, I would describe, the work. I'm going to just go back so you're not seeing the next slide. So the first ideas of these stacks, right, and the different layers, which I think can also be a reference to the interface, but it's also a reference to breaking of traditional borders. So I wanted to bring this to you because it's an example of like what they're talking about design and also its influence on socio-cultural issues. And what they're looking at is like sovereign borders. And so, I think that in the first video, really, they're talking about, this idea of place and geography, and that our borders are solid wall constructed walls at our borders kind of thing, safe spaces. It's not a reality, and that there are these other realities. There is in our reality these other forms of how our borders have already dissolved, and that exists especially in digital spaces where you can talk to anybody in the world almost at any time if you just go online and search for it. And then the interface is, of course, like the idea of looking at the world and seeing another layer of information. And just want to point out one word he used to describe Facebook and Google. He called them interface regimes. So I just want to point out to you also the language that like this this scholar particularly is using to describe these tech companies. Of course, we're our own thinkers, and we'll make our own decisions, but about what that is. But that's a clear point of view that he has taken, and I think it's important to recognize that, because if we can't just take Google and Facebook as the status quo, or it's important to think about them and put them into perspective and understand what they're doing. And so the scholar Benjamin Bratton sees them as interface regimes, right? Okay, the last visual I want to show you is from this book by Jennifer Rhee. It's called The Robotic Imaginary: The Human and the Price of Dehumanized Labor. So dehumanized labor meaning AI and robots, right, and technology. And so all of the examples I took are about drones. So they're from chapter 4, which is called Dying, and then the subhead is Drone Labor, War, and the Dehumanized. And this all might seem quite negative, actually, but a lot of this is or sad, not negative, right? It is what it is, but sad. But it's actually, I think, illuminating. Right, it's illuminating, and we're able to just sort of absorb and understand our history, and I think that can help us look at our other situations with similar historical and objective point of view, and then of course find our own point of view and our own opinions from our own research and experimentation that we'll do together. So this first piece that I'm showing is Taeyu Cole, an artist who tweeted. It's called 7 Stories. So a 7-part excursus for Saturday morning. Each age has its presiding metaphor. Ours is aerial bombing. Drone warfare and the IMF are variations on a theme. Decisions taken from a great height with disregard consequences on the ground. And it goes on to talk about those different references to drones. And I actually had a different one I wanted to show too, but I will look that up later. Okay, and then this is the second piece. So just an interesting, photographic project. So it's by Omar Fast. On the left, it says white men in, quote, traditional headdress and clothes more typical to tribes from further south. Omar Fast, 5,000 feet is the best, as in from a drone, right? And this is making a comment on military technologies, drones used in the Middle East and other countries. So those countries there. So 2011, and the one on the right is drone shot following a boy on a bike. And this idea is that it's a child on a bike, and there's a drone who's capturing video, but is also capable of dropping a bomb at that very moment. So some examples of community organizations for possible partnership. This is kind of a left turn, but so going from viewing the images, we can also start to think about, are there community organizations we want to talk to? And maybe that now we're just creating references and there's no actual outreach. It might be too early, but to start to collect and look at, start to collect links and, references and look at different areas. And so this is an example of a group in New Jersey, but this can obviously be state, local, national, international. The internet allows us to be that broad. As far as geography. So I'll show you, I believe you can all still see my screen because I'm sharing it. Please say if you can't because I'm not looking. So for example, this is their website. It's called the Anti-Poverty Network of New Jersey, and they do a lot of work understanding poverty, looking at the different geographic areas of poverty, and they have an amazing book, really a thesis called The Uncomfortable Truth: Racism, Injustice, and Poverty in New Jersey. And this is like free and available online. It's 12 pages, and it makes very, very clear, systemic solutions and priority recommendations. So it makes clear what their calls to actions are. And so if we're thinking about New Jersey, say, then this would be a good place to start looking for information on the socio-political side of whatever we decide to engage with. And I think that, you know, they have open meetings and such. So this is just an example of like something that could be interesting to engage with. So then moving on, so we've looked at some art examples, right? And then and some design. And we thought about speculative design. We're still thinking about this approach. And so I want to show you some examples of like a high fidelity web prototype that could be made, right? High fidelity would take longer, of course, than the next one I'm going to show you, which is like a low fidelity. So for this high fidelity, I just wanted to show you like what could be made. So this is called Me Too Rising with Google. So I'm going to click on this, make it full screen. So once I'm here, you know, it animated this quote, really beautiful. The world is spinning, and I can hit explore. And it tells me what it is in the project, right? A visualization of the movement from Google Trends. So notice this timeline and the soundscape, right? So this is an interactive site, so I can click and move and distribute. There are a lot more examples like this that we've already accumulated, but this is just one. So I can click, let's go Sao Paulo, Brazil. So once I click on it, it zooms in and it gives me this feed of search results from today. So it says, Brazil has serious Me Too problem, Bloomberg. My breast, my rule, a Brazilian #MeToo movement. Celebrity healer in Brazil is accused of sexually abusing, likely. So I can see all search results, right? Or I can follow Me Too. I can change the timeline from today to go back to March 24th, 2018. And I can see what's coming up for then. So similar top search results, but the next two did change. And so what this website has done since it was established on October 1st, 2017, was it's using techniques like web scraping and Google Earth and like the Google search tool to automatically like search Me Too and then populate this website with information. So it's like curating information from the web. And, you know, I believe that the thesis of this website is that they believe that the internet's search tools are actually, or they're saying by using this project that the internet search tools results for Me Too is a good indicator of what's actually happening in that country or in that city at that time. So that might sound obvious to us, right? But like, oh, well, yeah, trending, right? This is trending, that's trending. So we're kind of used to the idea that the internet and what's trending on the internet is a reflection of what's happening in the world. This wasn't always the case, and I think it's important to be mindful of that we're making that claim, especially when, as we know, not everybody has access to the internet. So there's a large population of people who are actually not being included here. That's not a critique on this website. That's just, you know, bringing in all the knowledge that I know into what we're discussing. Okay. I can go back to Globe, and I can, you know, continue to search, and it tells me like top searching cities at this moment. Let's go to Oklahoma City. The woman who created Me Too long before Ellen DeGeneres shares Me Too story. Me Too moves Christians to speak up and speak, ... Okay. A medium to low fidelity example of like what could be done, and I'm gonna have to turn off the other sound. But this is a student project, really like a class project for students of this school, SAIC, the School of Arts Institute in Chicago. I'm gonna click on that. close V2 Rising, and you'll see that it's loading. So this is made in Unity, it tells me right there. And so you'll see, I call this low fidelity, not because it's not a really interesting system, but because this would probably make you nauseous if you did it too much. You know, it's moving really fast. There's a lot of things like, whereas the V2 Rising was this like beautifully curated, perfectly aesthetically looking piece, which we don't have to strive for, but it's a easier user experience. But this is an interesting, you know, composition on its own because it's built in this 3D space. So Unity allows you to work in this 3D space, right? And I can't move, that's okay, but my mouse is letting me look around, and I have this Cups character with a VR headset on, right? It's like a tarot card character who's following me around, although I think he's stuck in the tree. No, he's back. Okay. So this website has a pretty simple layout, actually. So it has these squares throughout the 3D space, and I can hover over it. It changes colors. I can click on it, and it takes me to this like overlay page. It's kind of like an HTML link, the way that it's working, and it tells me what the class is and what's happening in the class. And then I have a button over here. I can choose close. Oh, and I can scroll. Not really. So I think that their scroll is broken, unless I need to click scroll. Nope. Okay. What else this does is sets up.
Your scroll was really, really slow.
Oh, my computer's probably working really, really hard.
No,
I hear it.
Yeah, it's really slow.
Is it better now? Can you see the Avery Williams screen now?
Yeah, I can see it. But the scroll
Okay.
part on that last screen that you were on, it was very, very slow. Like you had to like
Okay.
keep bringing your mouse down for it to move like the slightest bit.
Oh, okay. So when you tried it, yeah, I didn't. I wasn't that patient, so to me it didn't work. But okay. So once we get into a new page, you know, we have this different kind of layout. There's a drawing here. There's a description. I can choose to return to main page or enter the experience. So I'm going to click on that and see. It's going to take me to Instagram. So I need to open it on a mobile device. And let me see if I can change this to mobile. No. So it's an AR filter. So that's why it's saying I need to open on a mobile device. I'm going to go back to the main page and see if I can grab something else. So this is just another version, you know, say if we even thought of this as like a process board where we could put in ideas, like organize your research papers, and you each have your own page, or, you know, we come up with different ideas and we make pages for those ideas. So it could be a process board. It could be more than that. But I really like this sort of low fidelity idea. Yeah, I'm not surprised that some of these aren't working. Let's see if I can get one to work. Okay, at least this one has a GIF. So I don't believe I'll be able to enter the experience, but there's a description here. I'm gonna just try. Oh, well, that's cool. This link, instead of taking me to the experience, taking me to this person's page, website, which is kind of neat because then instead you get to see the results of it, right? So even though this is like a fun project, there's some really interesting moments here, like this one with the real horses. And, you know, you get this like grid of experimentation and like personality and expression. Okay. Okay. So what skills will you learn? Like what's actually going to come out of this project? I felt it was important to also discuss this. So while we're putting together projects like this, and also I want to say this very explicitly so that you can also repeat it very explicitly. You know, you're working on a project, on a collaborative project. So you're learning how to project manage yourselves. Also to process documentation. So you're learning how to document the process, how to document your research and ideas, as well as like your outcomes and how you're making things. Collaboration and working on a team or with a team. Research methods, so how to research the theoretical approaches and how to interpret like theoretical approaches to technology. Big ideas about technology, which really are not just, they don't just live in academic spaces because they actually determine the future of businesses. So if you want to be in a business and work in a business and make a difference or be a thinker in that business, right? Researching and understanding what's going on around you is going to help prepare you for those roles. Also web development. So the idea is this will be something where we can show a web site or web application or Unity application online, even if it's a really early low fidelity project. And then this project will continue to grow for several, well, it just will continue to grow for the future and, you know, at least several years plus, and as well as storytelling. So, you know, what does your research have to say? And then what do you have to say? And how do those two converge? And how do you tell the story, not just through information and text, but also through visuals and making? Okay, and I wanted to mention this event that came very conveniently into my inbox yesterday. So I'm gonna send, oops, when we get back, when we start talking, I'm gonna send this link at the bottom. So there's this event on Thursday, tomorrow night at 7 p.m. It's virtual, it's at Yale University, and it's on technology and social justice, and you must RSVP. And once this gift starts going, we'll see that it's on technology and social justice and the digital divide and equality for education. So I think that will be really interesting, even if your focus is not on education, you know, it's going to show you how they're applying this idea of like a digital divide and thinking about it as an equity question in education. So I'll send you that link again. And then, here we are, discussion, questions, and review. So this is sort of like an encompassing slide to say, like, what is the future of equity? What are we saying about it? What do we want to put forward? Again, the long list of who, what, where, now, when. I think I'm adding the now and it doesn't belong there. Anyway, and then the tasks that we can look to see, you know, am I on the research? Am I in development? Am I making a prototype now? Have I shown people that prototype? So this is a guide for designing. And then what tools am I using? You could add to this list, take away from this list. What techniques am I using? And what are your goals? And then I think then the goals, you know, for the project are gonna, like the description, be a living thing that we discuss. So I'm gonna go back to like this presentation mode and send you that link. I guess I don't want to stop sharing my screen so we can like go back and forward between things, but I will like open the view again so I can see everybody. So I'd love to hear, yeah, initial thoughts, feedback, questions from everyone. So it's a lot of information that I just shared, so I know it can be maybe hard where to start. I would invite you to start by commenting on one of the higher low fidelity experiments, or, you know, thinking about just one of the examples we showed, right? One of the videos. So we could start just by exploring the content here, or you could tell me what you think the future of equity is. I'd be interested in that too. Love to see faces again, if that's okay to ask for.
Ray's having a little difficulty with the Wi-Fi on campus, which is why he's gone. And right now, he's just messaged me that in the background. Oh,
Okay.
it looks like he's told that to everyone too.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's not disrespect, it's just logistics.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant. I mean, I have lots of thoughts on this, but I mean, I've been processing a lot of this information for a while. So, you know, I really sort of look to the class, you know, to see what they think right now.
Yeah, I invite questions too, like were you talking about in here? Or like, can you expand on that, right? Because like, you know, I have also been dealing with these ideas for a long time. So I'm hoping that they're communicating.
I don't have any questions because I've been working with you guys for this for a while now, and I'm pretty much on board of what's going to happen.
So maybe it's helpful for Shem and Ray to just say too, you know, that the examples that you showed, so you're, for me, like I've given them a lot of readings over the last 3 weeks. So, you know, I know what they've been having to read and think about. So I think what's helpful, you really hit it on the head very well, right? We've looked at essentially 4 different kinds of frameworks for project management and for ideation and for working through ideas. And they're in that continuum of the support of capital on one side, right? Like the idea of perpetuating the design system and innovation vis-a-vis, you know, capitalism versus, you know, these systems that call to question and decolonize, right? Because speculative design on the one hand is sort of it's a challenge to the status quo. And it doesn't, you know, I would also say that experimentation doesn't necessarily say that it doesn't have any sort of commercial value either. I think it's important not to work towards utopia specifically or dystopia as our speculative article talked about, speculative design article talked about. It's really important to, you know, understand that what we're trying to do is tell nuanced stories. And it's very likely that a project like this is going to be data driven. And yeah, so maybe I'll just sort of leave it there and see what other folks have to say. Let's see,
We
Ray
have a
said,
chat from
yeah.
Ray. Shall I read it? I'll read it. I think the future of equity has to be about universal access to the internet. The disparity is severe, and the fact that we have people within our zip code that might not be a part of our network world is bothersome to me. Yeah, I think that's very fair and accurate account for like what's happening, and you know, your feelings are, I share them. And I guess, you know, speculatively, design wise, is how does that happen? You know, is it an object that you create? Is it a movement that you create? Is it, you know, what does it look like for everybody in our zip code to have access to the internet? Because that's not happening now. So how does that happen? And maybe instead of relying on, say, well, you know, we should have money to invest in everybody to get routers. Maybe there's a different kind of solution, right? Like maybe there's a different way to distribute internet and information. And, you know, we can look at the way that countries who are still developing their infrastructures use the internet and technology in a lot of different ways than we do in the United States. So trying to think of an example. Well, like I think it is in the Philippines, like they use Facebook as their internet. So when you go into buy a cell phone, they download Facebook for you and create an account, and that's commonly understood as the internet.
Well, and it strikes me that there are 3 major things that have sort of come up between our class discussions and the presentation today. 3 sort of keys about equity. Digital divide seems to be one. The idea of digital labor seems to be one, and we've talked in the past about education. So I see, you know, 3 different areas. I think I'm really interested in the digital labor component. So I know that's something that I would try to tackle as part of my contribution to a project like this. But, you know, just to talk a little bit about, you know, what a modeled outcome might look like, right? And the different lenses that we could look through in terms of, you know, I think a lot of design thinking for people who are going to be in industry it's critical thinking. It's being a thought leader in your place of business potentially, right? Or, you know, for people who are going to become artists, it's making these vignettes that show a possible alternative to the status quo. So if I think about it, right, like if we think about that issue of how do we solve the problem of people not having connectivity and being part of a network, I can think of public libraries that have made these, you know, boxes available that you can check out for weeks at a time so that you can have internet access at your home, right? So there's a very mechanical system that is trying to continue to honor the status quo, but trying to do so thoughtfully and inclusively, right? And has real dollars and cents tied to it. I can think of the model that Google had where they were trying to figure out how to make a mesh network. And they ended up using hot air balloons floating, you know, somewhere in the stratosphere in order to create coverage across the globe, you know? So that's a design example that has not been implemented, but has proof of concept. Or I can think back to the One Laptop program from maybe 15 years ago, maybe not quite that long ago, where there was a hand crank on the computer to charge the battery. And the Wi-Fi basically used BitTorrent technology in order to create coverage in these villages that didn't have power. And by hand cranking and being online, your computer helped to create that network in small villages so that people had the ability to search the internet, you know, in an African village. So there's all kinds of models for thinking about the future, be they like immediate futures or far-fetched futures. There's also the idea of like policy, right? Like, what does it look like when the internet and access to information is treated like a utility and a government comes in and writes policies and builds infrastructure to support that utility, right? So there's the advocacy that can happen through a design project that gets, you know, people energized and engaged working on a project like that. So there's a huge spectrum where these kinds of interventions can take place. That's at least how I'm responding to what you've shown us tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you just said too, and I want to give others a chance to respond, but it connects to what Ray has just put in the chat, which is, I said, I know it's almost an impossibility to connect everyone, but maybe we could theorize a utilitarian solution to help provide access. And in some ways, a utilitarian solution is, you know, like you said, policies. You know, that is one version of that, and all the examples you gave. So, but those are just several ideas. So, you know, what is the spectrum of those ideas? And yeah, and I think that we could think about different ways of like connectivity and also start to really understand what the actual numbers are. You know, if that's an interest, you know, who has access in the state of New Jersey or even Monmouth County, and to try and find that information. I don't know if it's available because it's so privatized through, like, I have Verizon Fios and other people have Optimum. Is that accessible information? And is there something that we can do with that data to create awareness of the lack of, you know, like where there is disparities in access, even in our community? And the quality, right? It's not just do you have access or don't you, but what is the quality of the access? Because as we know, when you don't have access to high performing Wi-Fi, it can be really hard to participate in the same ways, or, you know, like sometimes people break up and yeah, the quality is important as well.
Yeah, so this would be you know, this could be an opportunity to really study like the bureaucracy in New Jersey or Monmouth County, and look to those systems that are in place that attempt to safeguard our understanding of that utility. And I did share that document from the Poverty Network with the class, and I saw lots of opportunities where there are calls for data that don't exist, right? So like, what theoretically, what would a new system that collects that kind of data under any of those key points look like? And how might one visualize and use that information were it to be available?
Right. So we could think about, you know, instead of solving the problem by giving people access, we could think about like, what can we do to just illuminate the problem? And like, how do you tackle something that nobody really knows that much about? So as makers and thinkers and designers, how can we create some kind of, like you just described, system that can show that maybe in one scenario, but like internet access, and be applied to others, like some of those points. So that would be like tool making, which is a really interesting way to think about like designing and futures, right? Like, and how to affect the future.
Well,
I personally really liked the reading on speculative design that you sent me. I believe, I don't know how many they've read, but it was the one in, it's a .hr, so it's a Croatian public URL, that one. And there was like this caution that I feel like is a new idea, because I've read a lot of dystopian and utopian and theory, and I really appreciated the, you know, caution on total dystopian and total utopian, because I thought that was a really important nuance that hadn't existed before. And it just, I think it calls for more specificity, and rather than like moderation, like this isn't a moderate argument. This is just like, if we're not thinking about a utopia, then we have to think about reality a little bit, and like, how do you get really specific and not ignore human behavior, essentially, you know, because utopia assumes maybe people will behave in certain ways, but we have institutions within human behavior that have existed for a really long time, like friendships and marriage and all that kind of stuff, you know, that exists between humans for very long periods of time. Leaders, you know, that's an example of like in a utopia, perhaps you could imagine a leaderless world, but we've had leaders since forever. That's very accurate. For a very long time. So
since primates threw their first poo.
There you go. Yep.
Luxury versus a commodity. Yeah, definitely. I agree with Ray. And that goes to the heart of, you know, that idea of, is it a public utility to have access to information in this day and age?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's like it's acting as a luxury now, is how I think I'm understanding you, Ray. But that, you know, ideally it would be a common good that is like a utility that everyone would have access to, but it's acting right now. It's a luxury.
Sorry, dog's barking in the background. I think it's maybe based on like age or something, whether it would be a luxury or or utility. Because right now I feel like it's a utility to access the world and information we wouldn't have had access to before. But back when, like, I remember when the internet first came out and, you know, signing on to AOL and stuff like that, it was a luxury to have that. because you needed to have a phone, you needed to have a decent computer, and I need to kill my dogs. It's like a dog barking festival outside, except he's in the house. So yeah, but I mean, when it first came through, it was definitely a luxury to have it, and it was slow as heck. But it was like you were just sitting there waiting for like the "You've Got Mail," and you were talking about how in the Philippines, Facebook used to be, or Facebook is like the internet. That's how AOL used to be. In order to connect to the internet, you had to go through AOL. Next, Netscape came after that, which was another browser, but like I remember not knowing what the hell the difference was at the time, because it was just something else that gave you access. But I always thought AOL was the internet. I'm like, yeah, I'm going on the internet, and I had to sign in order to do it. So it's interesting that Facebook is that for them in the Philippines.
So as a design strategy, one of the things I see are, we're able to draw those kinds of parallels in our own sort of personal experiences. If I think about the act of like participatory art, or the main mode of working in participatory action and intervention, right? The idea of taking all of those kinds of stories and doing textual analysis on them to find, the O'Grady text talks a little bit about contextual analysis and ethnographies. So, one kind of tool making that we could do as a group is, that kind of collection of storytelling where people share their personal histories in addition to, say, work, so, and I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, but, if we were to sort of advocate this idea of the utility of internet, having people of all different ages talk about that exact story. I remember the first time that I got on AOL too, and maybe our age, we're very similar in age, and it might have some bearing over that, right? But imagine the stories that pop up. We're also both white and middle class, I suspect. We come from different places in the country, but we have a lot of commonalities. But if you can collect, participatory voices of a lot of different people coming into technology in that way, and like thinking about digital divide and whether or not something is luxury or a utility, a lot can emerge from like a polyphony of voices too, in addition to what other sort of design intervention. So there's all kinds of ways we could tackle a challenge like this. And I think there's room in the project, as Amanda has said, for all of us, could be working on a piece that works in aggregate, or we could be working on a common thing that's all together. I don't have a preconceived notion of how we work that out yet. I think it's important for everybody to sort of bring, their interest and prerogative to it and hash it out through the process, making a common problem space for us. So I do want to say, maybe just to turn the gears a little bit, I know for our class, we're going to be working through midterms on a precedent and literature review that I'm going to assign tonight after our guest leaves. But I wondered, just in terms of next steps and like building consensus as a group, working with people who don't necessarily meet with our class and out, what are your preferred ways of communicating and shared space? How would you like to see that happen? And that's a question for everybody in the room.
I like Slack. I also like Padlet for something like that as well. Or maybe just like a Google Doc where you can just throw out ideas.
I don't know Padlet, but I'm looking it up. I'll put that in my list to read. Certainly IDM Research Lab already has a Google Drive. We could put shared access on that for everybody for a project.
I'm with Ray, like online kind of stuff is definitely Zoom. but collaborative stuff offline, just to keep stuff together.
Okay.
A Padlet is like a parking lot where you post your ideas for everybody in the group to see.
Oh, it's like an Evernote.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
We could make a channel for this on our Slack. And like I said, I was going to invite my students from IDM Studio,
Okay.
who are going to be working on several exercises until about the end of October. And then I'm going to introduce some, I'm going to introduce this to them now, but then I'm also going to introduce like the idea of their final project, which they'll start around the end of October. And then they can think about incorporating these ideas and working on a project in relationship to this. That. So that should be about when your lit reviews and paper and such is done.
Just added a channel called Future of Equity to the IDM Slack.
Awesome.
And if we need to set up document access to the Google Drive for that, I can work on that later.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Ray, yes, we do have a Slack already set up for class. I'll send you an invite to that now.
Why can't I see that channel didn't pop up? Maybe.
And Ray, that's in the chat now. All right.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
so much
me.
for coming out tonight. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna fix this couple of typos I have going on, and then I'm gonna upload it to the lab, and I can also share it on our Slack channel. So I'll do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.